Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a chemical engineer and currently a postdoc at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab here in Berkeley. To me, science is exploration because I get to ask a lot of questions that few people are asking, or maybe questions that nobody has asked before. Sometimes this is a little intimidating because we might not have the technology to answer my question, but it's exciting to be able to ask it and explore the boundaries of knowledge nonetheless. I've been doing research for a while. I started in undergrad asking questions about how we could use algae for biofuel. And then in grad school, I moved more to materials and began asking questions about plastics and how we could use different types of plastics to purify water, those plastics being membranes. And now in my postdoc, I'm still asking questions about plastics or membranes and interested in those plastics in alternative energy devices. So as you just heard, I'm studying plastics. In science, we talk about plastics, or we use the term polymer. And most polymers look like spaghetti. They're very disorganized, kind of a mess. So if I were a science superhero, the superpower that I would want would be to convert any polymer of any type into any shape that I wanted. So maybe I could make polymers that look like lasagna, which are very organized and very discrete. So that's the superpower I would want. When I'm not in lab, I still like to explore. I like to explore my neighborhood, the different plants in my neighborhood and the artwork in my neighborhood. I like to explore flavors through cooking, and I like to explore nature, whether it be climbing a rock and getting up real close and personal with the rock by climbing it, or by hiking through the mountains, or by watching a plant grow. Coming back to what I do in lab, I'm in the field of alternative energy, but before we discuss that, let's discuss how we currently get energy, which is primarily through fossil fuels. However, we're using fossil fuels at a rate much faster than fossil fuels are being produced, which means sometime in the future we are going to run out of fossil fuels. So this motivates the development of alternative energy, as well as because the consumption of fossil fuels pollutes the environment and contributes to climate change. We're also interested in developing alternative energy. So we get energy from fossil fuels by burning hydrocarbons. So here at the bottom, I have an example of a hydrocarbon, and it's just a bunch of carbon atoms represented by the C's linked together by chemical bonds. These lines represent the chemical bonds. Now, when we burn these hydrocarbons, we break these chemical bonds, and the energy is stored in these chemical bonds. So when we break those chemical bonds, we get out energy, and we also produce carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide goes into the atmosphere and is what contributes to climate change. So the type of alternative energy that I want to talk about is similar to how a leaf gets energy, and it's essentially running this process in reverse. So a leaf, when it does photosynthesis, collects carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and uses energy that it harvests from the sun or collects from the sun in order to turn that carbon dioxide into chemicals. So it's building these chemical bonds, which again, these chemical bonds have energy in them, and it's storing that energy from the energy that it collected from the sun. So there's a group of scientists at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab that are interested in creating a device that works similar to a leaf, which will collect carbon dioxide and convert it into a form of chemical energy, which we can use in our cars or other devices, and collecting that energy from the sun. So you and I can eat glucose or sugar, table sugar, and get energy from it. However, I can't stick glucose into my car and expect my car to be able to move. At the National Lab, we're interested in converting carbon dioxide into ethanol, which we can stick into our cars, which is a form of energy that our cars can use. Leaves are pretty complex. There's a lot of molecules moving around, a lot of different phenomena occurring, and the same is true for artificial photosynthesis devices. So here I have a diagram of an artificial photosynthesis device, and you can see it has a lot of components, a lot of things happening. I am interested in studying the membrane in artificial photosynthesis devices. So this membrane sits right at the middle of the device. So what are membranes? Well, the membranes that I'm working with are polymer, so they're plastics, and they're a material with which we can separate molecules. So the phenomena that I'm interested in studying is the separation between different molecules. So here I have my membrane, which is represented by this brown box. You can see it has spaghetti-like polymers inside of it. Then over here, I have a group of molecules, and I have two different types of molecules. I have some blue molecules and I have some red molecules. So membranes are materials through which these molecules can transport to different degrees. So maybe the blue molecules transport very easily across the membrane, while the red molecules don't transport so well. And so in this way, we can get a separation of the blue molecules away from the red molecules. So looking at our photosynthesis device, you can see these little bubble-like structures are different types of molecules. You can see we have different molecules on either side of the membrane, and so that's important for keeping those molecules on either side, but we also need some molecules to pass across the membrane from the anode to the cathode. And so this is what I study. What are the properties of the membrane that keep some molecules on the same side of the membrane while allowing other molecules to pass across? So I study structure-function relationships. What does this look like on a day-to-day basis? Well, it starts off with making polymer. So I do some chemical synthesis, which is kind of like cooking. And then I take that polymer that I make and I make a membrane out of it. And here at the center, you can see an example of a membrane that I've made. And then I've isolated a little piece to start testing and making observations about. The types of observations I make are on the membrane structure. So how much space is between the polymer chains in the membrane? And I can study this by observing how much water a membrane can hold, because water goes into the space between the polymer chains. So if I know how much water is in the membrane, I know how much space between the polymer chains there is. Another observation that I make is related to the membrane function. How fast do molecules move across this membrane? And I can study this in this device here, which is a diffusion cell. So my membrane is sitting here between these two spaces, and I can put the molecule that I'm interested in testing on this side of my membrane, and then watch how fast it moves over to this side of the membrane, and in that way determine how fast the molecule can move across the membrane. So the types of results I get, I want to compare the structure of the membrane, which is shown here on my x-axis, which is increasing space between polymer chains. So moving from right to left, there is more and more and more space between my polymer chains, which is the description of the membrane structure. And then I want to compare that to the function of my membrane, which is the rate of transport of a solute of interest, or a molecule of interest. So going from bottom to top, we're increasing in the rate a molecule can pass across my membrane. And so here's an example set of data that I've collected. And so you can see that as I increase the amount of space in my polymer, in my membrane, the molecules can move faster. So now my question to you is, looking at these two different streets, you can see one has a lot of people on it and one is very empty. My question to you is, which street do you think you could walk down faster? Now think about if you were racing a friend and your friend was driving a car. Who do you think would win? And how does that relate to your answer to the first question? And what are some factors that influence your answer to these questions? How do you go about thinking about if you or the car would move down the street faster? And lastly, I want to leave you with the question of, what are some examples of membranes in our day-to-day lives that we interact with every day? And with that, I look forward to talking with you soon.